In 1989, NBC executives sat through the pilot of a new show and wrote this note in their internal report. No warm, central characters, no growth, no lessons, not recommended. They aired it anyway, barely. It ran as a summer filler with almost no promotion, slotted against programming nobody was watching. The assumption was that it would disappear quietly. 35 years later, that show is still the template every sitcom writer either follows or consciously fights against. What NBC thought was a flaw turned out to be the formula. The world Seinfeld walked into. To understand what Seinfeld broke, you have to feel how dominant the old sitcom formula actually was. The 1980s were the decade of the family sitcom. The Cosby Show, Family Ties, and Growing Pains followed a single, reliable architecture. A problem arises. The characters struggle with it. Someone learns something. The episode ends with warmth, often with a literal embrace. Critics loved this formula. Audiences loved it. Advertisers loved it most of all because it delivered viewers in a relaxed, receptive state of mind. The sitcom was not just a TV format, it was a social contract. You tune in, you feel good, you come back next week. Nobody was looking for something different. The format was working, which is exactly why everything was about to change. No hugging, no learning. Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld didn't set out to write a manifesto. They set out to write a show about where material comes from, how a stand-up comedian observes the world, finds the absurdity in ordinary situations, and builds jokes from what everyone else ignores. The premise was almost confrontationally simple. 4 self-absorbed New Yorkers, none of whom grow, none of whom learn, none of whom particularly deserve your affection. They would talk about the mechanics of everyday life, the right way to accept a compliment, the unspoken rules of parking, whether it's acceptable to double dip a chip, as if these questions were genuinely urgent. No issue of the week episodes, no very special moments, no resolution designed to make you feel reassured about the human condition. Larry David reportedly used a 2-word test when writers pitched stories. He asked, "Would that really happen?" Not, "Is it funny enough?" Not, "Does the character learn from it?" Would it actually happen? That single filter produced a kind of realism that felt completely unlike anything else on television, not because the show was gritty or dark, but because it was precise. Seinfeld did not reject the sitcom formula. It replaced it with something far more demanding, the truth of how people actually behave when no one is watching. The architecture of nothing. Here is where most discussions of Seinfeld stop too early. People say show about nothing and treat it as a description of the content. It isn't. It's a description of the stakes. The content was actually extraordinarily dense. A typical Seinfeld episode ran 4 separate storylines with Jerry, George, Elaine, and Kramer each pursuing their own problem. The signature of the writer's room was the convergence. By the end of the episode, all 4 threads had to collide, usually in a way that made the resolution simultaneously logical and absurd. This was not easy to write. Most sitcom writers at the time were working with a single A plot and maybe a B plot for texture. Seinfeld was operating 4 plots in parallel and tying them together in 22 minutes. The writer's room developed what they internally called the show about nothing as shorthand for this structural discipline, because none of the plots carried moral weight. All 4 had to carry comedic weight. You couldn't lean on emotion to get you across the finish line. The writing had to be good enough to sustain 4 simultaneous stories with nothing but timing and observation holding them together. Most people experience Seinfeld as effortless. The effortlessness was the result of an almost punishing structural discipline. If you've been watching this channel, you already know we go deep on this stuff. If you're new, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from. Why it felt different, and still does. The specific quality that made Seinfeld feel unlike other sitcoms is harder to name than people expect. It wasn't the lack of sentiment. Plenty of comedies avoided sentiment without achieving what Seinfeld achieved. It wasn't the New York setting, or the stand-up interstitials, or even the specific chemistry of the 4 leads. It was the observation. Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David wrote from a position of genuine curiosity about social behavior. Not contempt, Curiosity. Why do we pretend to be happy to see people we don't want to see? Why do the rules of a parking space matter so much to us? Why is it so difficult to end a phone call? These questions aren't cynical, they're anthropological. And because the show took them seriously, the comedy that came out of them had a density that you could watch multiple times and keep finding things. This is the quality that doesn't get replicated. Every show that came after and tried to copy the show about nothing premise understood the absence. No hugging, no learning, no warm resolution, but missed the presence, the rigorous, almost scientific observation of how humans actually navigate social life. The imitators took away the formula. They left behind the engine. What came after and what got lost. Seinfeld ended in 1998. What followed was a fundamental restructuring of how sitcoms were made. The mockumentary format, The Office, Parks and Recreation, Modern Family, took the single-camera naturalism that Seinfeld had made desirable and pushed it into a new structural form. These shows traded the multi-camera, laugh-track architecture entirely. They were warmer than Seinfeld, more interested in character growth, more willing to let the audience care about outcomes. They were excellent shows, but they were also, in a specific sense, a retreat from the structural ambition of what Seinfeld had attempted. The laugh track disappeared. The four-plot convergence disappeared. The commitment to zero emotional resolution disappeared. And something harder to measure disappeared with them, the sense that a sitcom could be genuinely demanding, that it could trust its audience to find pleasure in pure observation, in the mechanics of social absurdity, without being guided toward a feeling at the end. Modern comedy is warmer, more inclusive, and in many ways more humane than Seinfeld. But warmth has a cost. When every episode ends with the characters slightly closer to each other, slightly more understood, the texture of real life, its unresolved awkwardness, its missing apologies, its social rules that serve no one, quietly disappears from the screen. People who miss Seinfeld are often told they're just being nostalgic. They're not. They're identifying something real that left television and hasn't come back. NBC's 1989 note was right about everything it observed. No warm characters, no growth, no lessons. What it couldn't see, what almost nobody could see in 1989, was that those absences weren't weaknesses. They were a completely different theory of what comedy could do. Not comfort the audience, not reassure them, not send them to bed feeling good about people. Make them see the world they already live in with absolute precision for the first time. That is why the show about nothing is still the blueprint. Not because it had no ambition, but because its ambition was invisible. The joke was never that nothing mattered. The joke was that everything did, the parking spots, the handshakes, the soup, the double dip. And once you see that, you can't watch television quite the same way again.